Welcome to this video on solving percent problems using equations. Let's begin. In this section, we will be setting up proportions to solve for an unknown quantity. Recall that a proportion looks like the following. A over B is equal to C over D. Of course, we do make the restriction that neither B nor D can be equal to 0 because, again, we can't divide by 0. Percents. All percents are part to whole relationships. Remember, the word percent literally means out of 100. Therefore, we can always rewrite percents as fractions or part to whole relationships. The percent divided by 100 is equal to the part over the whole. Let's practice rewriting the following percents. If we have 2%, we can rewrite that as a fraction by writing it as 2 divided by 100. Now, in all of these examples, we could probably reduce or simplify the fractions, but that's not really the point of this exercise. So I'm just going to leave it as 2 over 100. I'm not going to worry about simplifying or reducing it, but if you would like to, you can always do that. Okay, what about 10%? Well, that's 10 over 100. What about 150%? Well, that's 150 over 100. And last but not least, what about 4.12%? Well, that's 4.12 divided by 100. Now, in general, you would not want to have a decimal and a fraction, or a decimal inside of a fraction. But in this case, because this is only a stepping stone to setting up a proportion and solving it, we're not going to concern ourselves with that part of things right now. We're just going to leave it as 4.12 over 100, and again, then we would set up a proportion. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. So first, before we do our first example, I want to remind you that we're trying to find part of the whole. Therefore, whatever comes after the of in the following sentence is going to be the whole. In other words, it's going to go in the denominator of our fraction. The other value or variable is going to be the part. So we have to write the following examples as proportions and then solve them using the method we learned to solve proportions. And if you need to, you can always go back and re-watch that video. Okay, so let's begin. It says, what is 20% of 35? So as soon as I see a percent, okay, I'm going to do what we just did on this last screen, which is I'm going to rewrite 20% as a fraction, okay? So 20%, remember percent, per 100, out of 100. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that percent and write it as 20 over 100, write it as a fraction. Okay, so already, right, I already have half of our proportion, right? We have the A over B part, now we need the other half. Okay, so we're only given one other piece of information, which is this 35, right? So either the 35 goes upstairs, right, or the 35 goes downstairs, and we have to figure out where it goes. So remember, I gave you a big clue up here. It says whatever comes after of is the whole. Okay, so after you express your percent as a fraction, the next thing you can do is you can look for the word of and say, okay, well, whatever comes after the word of is going to be the whole. In other words, it's going to be the denominator of my fraction. So 35 is going to go downstairs. Okay, but now we have a problem, right? Because we're missing something right here. We have a blank. So what should go in that blank? Well, the other piece of information, if you want to call it that, is the word what. So remember, what is asking a question, right? It's like a mystery value, and so that's going to be a variable. So anytime you see the word what, you can just replace it with x or whatever your favorite variable is, doesn't matter. Okay, so that's it. 20 over 100 is equal to x over 35. So that's how I would write the question, what is 20% of 35? That's how I would rewrite it as a proportion. So now that I've set it up as a proportion, I can go ahead and cross multiply and solve. So remember, cross multiplying is going to look like this. So we have 20 times 35 is equal to 100x. And when we do that, we get 700 is equal to 100x. And then, of course, we just divide both sides by 100. So we find that x is equal to 7. So that would be our final answer. So let's do another example. This time the question says 18% of 220 is what number? So again, the first step that I like to do in these problems is anytime I see the percent, right, that's going to give me half of the information I need, half of my proportion. So I'm going to rewrite 18 as 18 over 100. Okay, I don't know if you noticed, but in both of these examples, 20 over 100, 18 over 100, if you had cared to, You could have reduced the fraction before continuing to solve the proportion. So if you'd like to do that first, you can. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as 18 over 100 and then fill in the rest of the proportion. Okay, so now we have this other piece of information, right? The other piece of information is 220. So the big million-dollar question here is, does 220 go upstairs or does 220 go downstairs? Is it the part or is it the whole? So again, right, the key is that whatever comes after the word of is the whole. So if I go back and reread this, it says of 220. So 220 is the whole. So therefore 220 goes into the denominator. Okay, so again we have a missing spot. So what goes in there? Well, it says what number. Remember, that's like a mystery value, right? So that's where we put our variable. That's what we're trying to find. Okay, so now we have our proportion set up. So just like last time, we can cross multiply and solve. So we have 18 times 220 is equal to 100 times x. So that gives us 3,960 is equal to 100x. Then we can just divide both sides by 100, and then we get x is equal to 39.6, and that's it. Okay. Also, I just want to remind you, when you write this step, the sides don't matter. In other words, if you wanted to rewrite it as 100x is equal to 18 times 220, right, because this is an equation and not an inequality, right, they have the same value. In other words, if I said, my name is Heather, or if I said, Heather is my name, right, if I said x equals 20 or 20 equals x, right, they have the same meaning. Okay, so if you just happen to write this, if you just happen to write this step and you put the 100x on the other side, it's fine, you're still going to get the same answer. Okay, let's keep going. So number 3 says, what is 5.5% of 248? So again, I'm going to capture the percent. That's the easiest thing to do. So instead of 5.5%, I'm going to write 5.5 out of 100, because again, percent means out of 100. I'm literally just translating it. Okay. Then I have to fill in the other side of my proportion. Okay. Again, it says that whatever comes after the word of is the whole. So of 248, so 248 is the whole. In other words, it's the denominator. And so my mystery number is the part. I'm trying to find 5.5 over 100 is equal to what over 248. So again, now I have my proportion all set up. So all I have to do is cross multiply. So I have 5.5 times 248 equals 100x. Okay, so we get 1364 is equal to 100x. We divide both sides by 100, and we get x is equal to 13.64, and that's our final answer. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed, but all 3 of these examples so far have had our variable x located in the same place, in other words, in the numerator. Okay, do you see that? Right? So all of these have been the same exact type of question. When we move into question number 4, now our variable is going to be located in a different place. So let's look at number 4 and see what we have. So this says 30% of what number is 45? So just like last time, right, I still have this percent. So the first thing I'm going to do, because it's the easiest thing for me to do, is to rewrite 30% as 30 over 100. Because again, percent means out of 100, so 30% means 30 over 100. Okay, so that's sort of the end of the similarities, because now, right, remember we said whatever comes after the word of is the whole. So what comes after of in this question? Well, it's not 45, is it? It's what number. So how do I translate number or what number? Remember, that's my variable. Okay, so this problem is fundamentally different from the previous 3 examples because, right, the whole is not 45 anymore, right? It's not the number, it's the variable. Okay, so we're saying that 45 is the part, right? And so 45 out of what number is equal to 30 out of 100. Okay, so again, the key here is just to look for whatever comes after the word of. That's your key thing to look for. So now that we have our proportion set up, let's go ahead and cross multiply and solve. So we have 30x is equal to 45 times 100. So we have 30x is equal to 4,500. And then we just divide both sides by 30. And we find out that x is equal to 150. Okay, let's do another example. Okay, this one says 42 is 15% of what number? So again, 15%, that's the easiest thing to rewrite. Percent means out of 100. So we write 15% as 15 out of 100, or 15 over 100. Okay, so then, right, the question is, well, we have a 42, and we're going to have a 42 and an x, right? So does 42 go upstairs, or does 42 go downstairs? That's what we have to figure out. Okay, and remember the key is that whatever comes right after the word of, right, that's going to be my whole. So it says of what number? So what number, right, we translate that as just x. Okay, so the whole this time is not the number, it's not 42, the whole is x, which means that 42 is the part. So now that I have my proportion set up, once again, I cross multiply and solve. So we have 42 times 100 is equal to 15 times x. So we have 4200 is equal to 15x. To find x, we just divide both sides by 15. And we find out that x is equal to 280. All right, let's do another example. This one says 88 is 2.5% of what number? So again, first thing I like to do is to take that percent and rewrite it. So it's 2.5 over 100. Again, percent means out of 100. So 2.5 out of 100 is equal to something. Okay. Again, we look at what comes right after the word of. What's coming after the word of in this example is what number. So what number is just x, or whatever variable or symbol you like to use, doesn't matter. Okay, you could even use a smiley face if you want to. Okay, so what number? That's your denominator. Okay, so what about your numerator? So then your numerator, right, or your part is x. So we have 2.5 divided by 100 is equal to 88 divided by x. Once again, we cross multiply and solve. So we have 2.5x is equal to 100 times 88. So that gives us 2.5x is equal to 8,800. Divide by both sides by 2.5. And we find that x is equal to 3,520. So if you look back at the last three examples, right, 4, 5, and 6, we can notice a pattern, and the pattern is that in these last three examples, x has been in the denominator, right? So in all three of those examples, x was my whole, right, and the other number that I was given is the part, and then on the other side is the percent. So in the next problem, we're going to change things up even more. So let's read the next problem. It says, what percent of 20 is 5? So in all of the 6 previous examples, if you recall, right, the very first thing I did was to rewrite my percent as a fraction, right? 2.5% became 2.5 over 100. 15% became 15 over 100. 30% became 30 over 100. But what am I going to do with this problem? It says what percent? Oh my gosh, right? So now the mystery value is the percent. So how can I write what percent as a fraction? Okay, well, remember what, right? That's just a variable, isn't it? That's my mystery number. So that's going to go upstairs. And percent means what? Out of 100. So this time, my variable is again in the numerator, but it's over 100 because the mystery here is the percent. I'm saying what number out of 100 is equal to, okay, and then we look at the other pieces of information we're given, right? We're given a 20 and a 5, okay? Now you might think to yourself, well, this is going to be 20 over 5. You might think that, right? And I understand why you would think that. However, right, you cannot rely necessarily on the order of that the information is given to you. What you can rely on is what comes after of is the what? Is the whole. So we have of 20. So that means that 20 is the whole, it's the denominator. So 20 goes into the denominator, and by default, 5 must go into the numerator. Okay, so we have x over 100, right? This represents what percent, okay? Then we have 5 over 20, right? And that's from of 20 is 5. Okay, so that's the hard part, right? The easy part, I think, in my opinion, is just cross multiplying and solving. So we have 20x is equal to 500. We divide both sides by 20. And we find out that x is equal to 25. Okay, So in my experience, these are the most confusing types of examples for students, so let's do several more to get comfortable. So remember, a good strategy watching these videos is to pause them when you start feeling a level of confidence, and try to work the example through by yourself, and then unpause it, maybe even fast forward through it, click through to the solution to make sure you are correct. Okay, so again, we have the phrase what percent. Okay, so what means X, that's the mystery number. Percent means out of 100, so we put it as X over 100. Okay, so we have half of our proportions set up. Now we need to do the other half, which is to figure out which of these numbers is the part and which of them is the whole. So remember, whatever comes after the word of is the whole. So it says of 320, so that's going to go into the denominator. And the numerator, of course, then must be 64. So again, in all of these examples, if you wanted to, you could reduce this fraction before you cross multiply if you care to. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cross multiply and solve. So we have 320x is equal to 6,400. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 320. And we're going to get 20. Now, there's one thing that I forgot to do in these two examples. And so let's go back to number 7. It says, what percent of 20 is 5, right? So it's literally asking me for a percent. So the answer isn't 25, is it? It's actually 25%, because it says what percent of 20 is 5, right? 5 is 25% of 20. So we actually need to make sure that this says 25%. Let's do the same thing in this example, right? So again, X is not equal to 20, it's equal to what? It's equal to 20%. So that's our final answer. So be careful in these problems. They can be a little bit tricky, right? Because it's saying what percent. So when you answer that question, right, you need to answer it as a percent. So what percent of 320 is 64? 20% of 320 is 64. All right, let's keep going. This says what percent of 32 is 40? So again, we take what percent, right? So that's the mystery number over 100. Okay, and then with the other numbers, we need to figure out which one is the part, which one is the whole. Again, you can't ask yourself, which is the bigger or smaller number. That's not going to help you. You can't rely on the order. What you can rely on is whatever comes right after the word of is going to be the denominator. Okay, so of 32. So 32 is the whole. It's going to go in the denominator. The numerator is 40. So you might notice that in this case, 40 is going to be larger, or 40 is larger rather than 32. So that means, right, you're going to have more than 100%. So we can just make ourselves a note over here, right, that X is going to be greater than 100%. You don't have to do that. You can just cross multiply and solve. But I just want to point out that it's okay, right? Sometimes our numerator will be greater than our denominator. It doesn't mean I messed up. It doesn't mean I did anything wrong. It just means that I'm going to get a value greater than 100%. All right. So let's go ahead and cross multiply and solve. So we have 40 times 100 is equal to 32 times x. So we have 4,000 is equal to 32x. Then we just divide both sides by 32. And when we do that, we get x is equal to 125. But again, there's one more piece of information I have to add, right? It's not just 125, it's 125%, right? Because the question says, what percent of 32 is 40? If I were to answer that question in a complete sentence, I would say 125% of 32 is 40. Okay. Last but not least, 120 is what percent of 80? So again, we have the phrase what percent. So that's going to be a mystery number, or any variable you like, over 100. Okay, so again, then we have two other numbers. We have 120 and we have 80. We have to figure out which one is the whole. So again, whatever comes after the word of is going to be the whole or the denominator in this fraction. Okay, so of 80, so 80 is going to be our denominator, which means that 120 is our numerator. So once again, notice, right, that our numerator is larger than our denominator, which means then when we're all said and done, we should get a value of x that's larger than 100%. That's okay. Doesn't mean I messed up. Doesn't mean I did anything wrong. That's just how it is. Okay. So we have x times 80, or 80x, is equal to 12,000, right? 120 times 100 is 12,000. Okay, so then we divide both sides by 80. Okay. and we get x is equal to 150, but again, we have to rewrite it as 150%. Okay, because again, it says 120 is what percent of 80, right? To answer that in a complete sentence, we would say 120 is 150% of 180.